من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لنكفرن عنهم سيئاتهم ولنجزينهم أحسن ما كانوا يعملون صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Respected Maulana, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, during this series of lectures that we have the opportunity to sit with one another and to speak about and to remember the lessons that we learn from Karbala in particular and the martyrs of Karbala, and of course from the progeny of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. In general, this is an opportunity that we have to, with the grace of Allah, solidify the message that we have brought into our hearts and into our minds in Muharram. And our effort should be to try now to make sure that whatever feelings we have been able to attain, whatever sincerity we have been able to discover within our hearts or create in our hearts greater than was there before. Whatever new information we have, we should be thinking about how to make sure that we can preserve it and we can grasp onto it and not lose it for the duration of our year. The period of mourning, it does come to a close. And in fact, if you look at history, the period of mourning that was emphasized by our imams, it was not even so long and so involved as we are accustomed to today. The greatest emphasis was on the mourning during the first 10 days of Muharram themselves. And our imams, they would remember the martyrs of Karbala, they would remember the tragedy that befell Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, and not just Ahlul Bayt, but all of Islam and all of humanity and all of creation. Not only in Muharram, but throughout the month of Muharram and the month of Safar. And in fact, throughout their lives, at any time of the year. But the focus that we have the freedom to give to our commemoration did not exist in the time of the Imams, for the Imams themselves, and certainly not for their followers. So it was sometimes with difficulty that there would even be a single majlis where the Imams would be able to invite their followers, and it was the practice of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, when there was going to be a mention made of the sacrifices of the martyrs of Karbala, then he would also invite his own household to participate in that gathering. A curtain would be set up, and the household of the Imam, the women and the children, they would also join into that same gathering. This was not common in the time of our Imams. Normally, whatever lessons the Imams gave, whatever lectures they gave to their followers, they were done in the Imam's public lectures, in the masjid, and usually not even in the masjid, but in their own homes. And whatever messages or lessons the Imams gave to their family, that was done in a separate setting. It was not the same setting. But when it came to the commemoration of Karbala, this was brought together. My point is that it was a very small number of actual majalis like this that were organized by the Imams. It wasn't 2 months and 8 days of a majlis every day, or 2 or 3, or sometimes even more as we have. It was something that was done primarily in the month of Muharram, often just for the first 10 days. Even then, it was not always something that the mu'mineen would be able to get together, or the Imams would be able to openly organize regularly. And yet the effects of those gatherings would be there in the hearts of those who participated and in their memories, not just until the next majlis in a few hours or until the next day, but it would stay with them for their entire lives. That is something that depends not on who is the speaker or who is reciting the poetry or what is the message that is being conveyed, but it depends on the heart and the intention of each of us who is attending, in whatever capacity we may be attending. Many of the people who would be there in the company of the Imams, they were not the most knowledgeable or the most insightful of the Imam's followers or companions. And yet they would derive a benefit from that mention of the events of Karbala and the message of Karbala that many, many other people who were in Medina at the time, who may have been in Kufa at the time, who may have been witnessing the same events, but in spite of their greater intellect, in spite of their greater social position, they were not able to derive that benefit. So this is something which depends on the intention and on the heart of those of us who have a commitment to Ahlul Bayt. What are we going to take from this gathering? And many of those gatherings that existed in the time of the Imams, especially the Marthiya portion, which was poetry, recited by well-known poets who would risk their lives and their well-being in order to praise Ahlul Bayt. Normally, poets at that time, they would earn their livelihood through poetry. But those who would recite poetry for Ahlul Bayt, they would risk their livelihood because they would be banned from the governors and from the wealthy people of society and from the caliph's court. They would sometimes be banished from the capital city. Their poetry would sometimes be censored and banned, and people would be punished even for writing it or for reciting it. These were people who risked their well-being and their life for Ahlul Bayt, and history has preserved the words and the poetry that they recited. Much of it is available in translation, and it has been the practice of literary-minded Muslims in Persian, in Urdu, and any other Islamic language to look at that literature as inspiration and as a basis for their own compositions in praise of Ahlul Bayt in their own languages as well. The point that I want to make is that those words are also accessible to us. The poetry of Dirbil, the poetry of Sayyid Himyari, the poetry of Kathir or Kuthayr, all of these poems, they have been recorded in history. They are available for us to look at. This was the exact same wording that would be recited in the presence of our imams or in the presence of the companions of the imams, and it would change a person's life. It would be sufficient for a person to stand up and say, I will not leave this room the same person that I was when I entered it. And yet, we can read that poetry, and yes, the environment does have an effect, but more than the environment and more than the actual words, it is the person who is listening or the person who is reading or deriving benefit, who is going to determine whether that poetry will simply seem like a very interesting composition of literature, it's worth analyzing for its literature, its literary value, or whether it will be something that will actually affect a person's heart and affect a person's decision making, so that when we leave that gathering, we will make decisions in a different way than we did when we entered. So I hope that inshallah, as we now are entering into the final days of that period when we will be devoting our thoughts to mourning and to remembering Karbala, that we will be thinking about this. What is it that we're going to take? How is it that our decisions will be different from how they were before this period of mourning? And how is it that we are going to be able to make sure that all of this mention of Imam Hussein and all of this remembrance of Imam Hussein, it will affect our actions and our priorities tomorrow and next week and next month, so that when we come next year, we will be moving forward and not just making up for what we have forgotten from the previous year. Please recite salawat. And in order to help us accomplish this task, I would like to devote the period that I will be speaking to you, and of course we will be benefiting from the very learned majalis of our Maulana Sayyid Tilmiz Hasan and Rizvi in Urdu. Those of us who speak Urdu, we will benefit from it by understanding the language. Even those who do not speak Urdu, as many of you may be familiar, Maulana mentions so many ahadith and ayat that you don't need to know Urdu in order to be able to understand what he is going to be conveying. But during this limited period that we have, I would like to speak about some of the lessons that we learn from the life of the progeny of the Prophet, of our Ma'asumeen alayhimus salatu wassalam, with regard to achieving a successful life. How is it possible to achieve success in the Islamic conception? No. That is a question which we can expand, and it can take up much more than 5 brief lectures or talks. Or it is something that we can begin to understand very quickly and very easily. And that is the first point that I would like to make and that I would like to talk about today. Islam wishes to bring success and salvation within the grasp of every human being. And so simplicity is an essential component of what the Prophet taught and what our Imams conveyed. When we make things too complex, too theoretical, too involved, then we might think that we are deriving insight. We might think that we are making reality more clear and more accessible to people. This is more detail. But in many cases, that is not true at all. If we had left it at what was simple and essential, it would be more easy for people to achieve success and salvation. Now, I say this with 2 purposes. One is for us to look at our own lives. What are the factors that are holding us back from spiritual progress and advancement? This is something which each and every one of us, we need to diagnose within ourselves. I have reached a certain state. I understand Islam. I am a Muslim. I believe certain things. I follow Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. But in many cases, we will feel within ourselves and we will know within ourselves that there is a plateau that we have reached. And then we're not going beyond it. Some of us, we may reach that plateau very early in our lives. We learned in Sunday school how to pray and how to fast. And then when we graduated from Sunday school, we never ever progressed beyond that point. Or those of us who did not go to Sunday school because it didn't exist in that time, or the calendar did not work that way in our countries, we may have learned certain things from majalis, and our education ended, or our development of progress and advancement in religion, it ended from that period in our lives. Some of us, it may have been an uncle or an aunt or a grandparent or a teacher who would come and teach us diniyat or teach us about religion, whoever it may have been. But there's a period when we progressed, and then it comes to an end. Sometimes it may be later in life. We may have continued to develop, and then marriage, children, earning a living, whatever it might be, it might have intervened. And we feel that now it's not so easy for us to continue on that path because we have so many other things to worry about. Our mind and our energies, they're devoted somewhere else. So how can I give my time to learning about religion, to progressing spiritually? And this is actually one of the ways by which shaitan ensnares us. By thinking that if you don't have the time, if you don't have the intellectual capacity, if you don't know a certain language, or whatever other obstacles each and every one of us might have, you will not be able to understand religion more deeply or to progress in your religiosity. But we see that in the early days of Islam, most beautifully, and throughout the history of Islam, the reality is something different. The first message the Prophet gave when he brought his religion to the people in Hijaz was he said, قُولُوا لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ تُفْلِحُوا. Say, there is no God but Allah, there is no one worthy of worship but Allah, and even that is an explanation that I am giving. Because ilah does not mean worship or sustaining or providing sustenance or providing guidance. It's a simple word that was used. It means there is no God but Allah. And the Prophet said that if you say that, then you will achieve the result that I am seeking you to achieve. قُولُوا لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ تُفْلِحُوا. Say, La ilaha illallah, and you will achieve success. It's not a long process. There isn't a 30-page contract that you need to examine in the company of your attorney and maybe a second attorney and perhaps other professional advisors in order to understand what Islam is. And then if you examine the document and if you're able to understand it, and then you sign on the dotted line, then you have passed the first hurdle. And then you need to do much, much more. Now, the Quran itself emphasizes that religion is not a piece of cake. It's not simple. It's not that there is not a whole lot to learn. And I will talk about that. But the point is that when the Prophet brought Islam, his first message is that this religion and understanding this religion and succeeding in this religion is accessible to each and every one of you whom I am addressing. The Prophet was speaking to people who were illiterate, to many people who had never seen a book or any piece of writing, to many people who didn't even know that such writing existed. Just to give you an idea of that level of separation from wealth and from learning and from civilization and from culture that existed in that time. It is said that in one of the early battles, when the Muslim armies had started to conquer the territory of present-day Iraq and Syria and then Iran, one of those illiterate tribal soldiers, he was able to capture, and it fell into his share to have the possession of one of the princesses of the conquered lands. When tribes were conquered, then those people who had lost the battle, they were distributed to the soldiers who had won. In some cases, they would join the household of those who had conquered as servants or as slaves. In many cases, they would be ransomed and they would be given their freedom in exchange for payment. So this was a princess who had been captured and now was in the control of this soldier. So he said that I want to ransom her and I'm going to get rich now. And one of her relatives found out that she had been captured. He came. He said that, what is the ransom that you demand? He said that I ask for 1,000 dirhams. And now the person, he couldn't believe that the price was going to be so low. But he withheld that shock. He said, are you sure? I don't think I can give that much. And the soldier said that, no, I won't take a single dirham less, 1,000 dirhams. And so reluctantly, the person gave the payment. He took his relative. The princess was freed. She went back to her people. And later on, when that story became known, one of those other soldiers who had a little bit more of an inkling, he said, why did you go and ask for only 1,000 dirhams? If you had asked this princess's relative for 10 times that much, or 100 times that much, or for a large treasure, he would have been able to give it and he would have willingly given it. And the soldier said, I didn't know that there was a number higher than 1,000. We count up till 1,000. And 1,000, that is the highest number that we have. These people, they didn't have many possessions for them to think that gold coins are counted beyond 1,000 or other possessions are counted beyond 1,000. So the Prophet was speaking to such people, but it is wrong for us to think that everybody the Prophet was speaking to was so simple-minded and so far from civilization. Among the Prophet's addressees, there were also many people who were very, very highly educated, very knowledgeable and very learned. The tribe of Quraysh itself, they didn't just begin to see the world after Islam. Abu Sufyan and other members of the Quraysh tribe, even members of the family of the Prophet, Banu Hashim, they had trade links with Yemen, with Syria, with Abyssinia or Ethiopia. They were familiar with the religions and the cultures of those people. Take a look at history and look at that disputation that took place in the court of the king of Abyssinia, where the cousin of our Prophet Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and the representative of Quraysh came and they were arguing their case before the Christian king. Now, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, he was the leader of that expedition. And this is also just one historical note that I would like to make. Whenever we look at the history of Islam, we see that when it came to the sons of Abu Talib was the heir to Abdul Muttalib. He had a role in preserving the spiritual heritage of the pure religion of monotheism that had been inherited from Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam. And according to some ahadith, he was a wasi who passed on that trust to the Prophet. It wasn't just that he was the caretaker of the Prophet, but he was the one who was literally preparing the groundwork in order for the Prophet to begin his message. Whenever history sees that the sons of Abu Talib Ja'far or Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam were present, then the Prophet always gave them the charge or the authority over whatever task was at hand. No other companion of the Prophet had that distinction. So if you look at even the senior companions of the Prophet, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, other companions of the Prophet, there were times when they might have been put in charge of an expedition and said that you have to go and accomplish this task, deliver a message, sign a treaty, conduct a battle, return to the Prophet. But there were other times when they were put under the authority of somebody else. That distinction belonged to the two sons of Abu Talib ﷺ, where the Prophet did not put them under the authority of anyone else. If they went, they were in charge. If they remained, they were in charge. So the disputation that took place, it was because of a worthiness. It wasn't a prejudice the Prophet had. And we can see that because the Prophet did not just give them the benefits of being in charge. He also gave them the hardships of being in charge. That is why Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, he was martyred in the lifetime of the Prophet. Why many of the other relatives of the Prophet who were the closest to him, they were martyred in the battle of Badr, in the battle of Uhud, and in the other battles of Islam, because the Prophet did not just say that I want to give you the charge or the authority in order to honor you because you are my relatives. They were worthy. The Prophet put them in charge. Sometimes it brought them prestige. At other times it put their lives at risk. But it was because of the worthiness the Prophet did so. So that disputation, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is on one side. And Amr ibn As is coming. He is disputing on behalf of the Quraysh. And I won't mention the disputation. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, he recites the verse of Quran, and he talks about the spiritual state of the Arabs. What were the things that they had been misguided from, and what were those areas that binded the Muslims to the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians. So he had a deep understanding of the spiritual reality of the Arabian Peninsula, of Abyssinia or Ethiopia, of the Jewish and Christian religion and their scripture and their teachings, and he was able to explain to the king that this is where our people were and where our Prophet brought us. This is where you are and how we are similar to you, and also where we are different. He didn't change the teachings of Islam in order to make them more easy for the Abyssinian king, but he recited those verses that speak about the position of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam within the Quran. And the king said that we cannot add a single letter to this. This is not any different from what our own Prophet taught. It is said that the king, he began to weep at the sermon of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. Now imagine, the Ethiopian king was not just a tribal chief in charge of a small tribe of 5,000 people. Abyssinia was a powerful empire at that time. Just in that same period, they had a navy. They had conquered Yemen. They would fight and sometimes defeat the Roman or even the Persian Empire, and sometimes they would be in alliance with the Roman or with the Persian Empire. So it was a powerful kingdom. The king is standing there. His bishops and his priests are in court, and his people, the people of a major civilization at that time, they are standing there. And Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is able to give a sermon that would make the king weep, who had been used to listening to the most eloquent speakers of his own time. And Ja'far had a handicap. He was speaking in Arabic, and the king was not a native speaker of Arabic. Either there was a translator, or he would be able to perhaps understand some words because of the similarity of the Amharic language and Arabic. But in any case, Ja'far was operating under a handicap, yet still, he had that knowledge. And also Amr ibn As. He was not an ignorant fool. He was able to argue and to go back and forth and to say that this religion is different from Christianity because they don't believe in this. And they don't believe in this. And they have these teachings that say that Isa alayhi salam was not a god, he was a man. So he also was able to hold his own in argumentation. Of course, the king was a just king. And there was a wisdom for which the Prophet had made the first hijrah of the Muslims to the court of Najashi and to Abyssinia. So the king was not fooled. He did not buy into those arguments. But we can see that there were also sophisticated people who did exist in Hijaz and in Arabia at the time. Some of them did accept the Prophet's message, like Ja'far. Some of them rejected the Prophet's message, but they were familiar with the scriptures of other religions and even with the philosophical decisions that took place in the ancient world. And they existed in the environment and in the society of the Prophet as well. It isn't that society was simple. Society had very ignorant people and it had very educated people. It had very sophisticated people. It was that the message of the Prophet was brought in a way to make things that were the most complex and that seemed to be the most distant from a person's minds and that seemed to be the most inaccessible to people. It brought them within their reach and within their grasp. So don't think the Prophet, he brought a simple message or he said, قُولُوا لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ تُفْلِحُوا, because he was speaking to a bunch of illiterate people. There were those illiterate people who didn't know that you could count beyond 1,000. They were among the ummah and the addressees of the Prophet. But there were also sophisticated people. And here is an interesting point. Who were the first to come to the Prophet and to accept his message? And this is dangerous territory now, because I'm going to say something that might raise 1,000 questions in our own minds, and we'll talk about that. But in general, who were the first to accept the Prophet? Now, I mentioned that it wasn't just the ignorant and the uneducated. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, he was one of the first to accept the Prophet's message, and he was among the most cultured, the most refined, and the most educated people who were present within Mecca at that time. So it wasn't limited to those who were weak or vulnerable. But there is no denying that in Islam and in previous religions, the very first people who accepted the call of the prophets, any prophet, including our prophet, were often those who didn't have all of those years of formal schooling behind them. Were often those who didn't have a great deal of worldly attachment beyond them. And that is something that raises a lot of questions in people's minds. Is religion for the simple-minded and for the ignorant? Do people who become more educated naturally lose their religion because now they know better? They don't need God in order to understand how the world works because they have studied astronomy or physics or biology or other different fields of knowledge, and they don't need any God to explain those things that they are ignorant of. That same objection, it existed within the time of the Prophet as well. The truth is that religion is, in its essence, simple. But there are many curtains that can come on our soul that can prevent us from being able to appreciate the truth of religion. And for most of us, all of our learning and all of our wealth and our possessions, they are a curtain. And so when I speak of the simplicity of religion, I'm not speaking about the fact that Islam does not appeal to the sophisticated. What I'm saying is that Islam will appeal to the sophisticated if they can peel away those curtains. That is the challenge. Most of us, we can't peel away those challenges. We can see that demonstrated in the life of the Prophet economically, religiously, even militarily. towards the end of the Prophet's life, after the conquest of Mecca, the entire Muslim army was going to face now one of its last military threats within the Arabian Peninsula. Thaqif, a tribe in Ta'if, and some of their allies in the Hijaz, they were still holdouts from Islam. They hadn't accepted Islam. Majority of people in the Arabian Peninsula, either they had become Muslim or they had submitted to the authority of the Prophet. Now, there were tens of thousands of Muslims who were with the Prophet. In previous battles, even when the Muslims were able to get soldiers, they didn't have food. In this case, there was plenty of food. The city of Mecca had just recently been conquered. Provisions were plenty in previous battles. There were many Muslim soldiers who used to go out to do battle without any armor. Not because they were showing their bravery, but because they didn't have armor. In this battle, there were shields and there were other military weapons that the Muslims were able to use for the first time. And as they went out, the largest army that had been gathered together until that time under the command of the Prophet, some of these early companions who had been with the Prophet in Medina, they had fought some of those difficult battles. They said, we're not going to lose now. We will not be overcome because of a lack of provisions or a lack of soldiers. Soldiers, they had the camels, they had the food, they had the weapons, they had the defensive preparations they needed, and yet the battle began and most of the Muslims fled. And some of those recent converts from Mecca who were not really converts, they spoke to one another and said, are they ever going to stop retreating, or are they going to go and drown themselves in the Red Sea? Because if they keep retreating at this pace, they'll hit the sea and then they're going to drown. So it was the largest Muslim army that came until that time, and yet it wasn't able to even maintain the same constancy, the same firmness in battle that the vulnerable Muslims did in their early battles. They weren't even able to maintain that same strength that a single soldier was able to do in the Battle of Khandaq. Read the history of Khandaq, and the greatness of Amir al-Mu'mineen is not how many times he had to strike Amr ibn Abdawad, and the symmetry of that attack that the Imam made. The beauty and the significance of that battle was that was the battle. It was one soldier who fought and who was able to win the battle against assembled thousands. So the constancy that was able to be demonstrated at those early battles, when there weren't those resources, it couldn't be maintained when all of those resources existed. And that was a lesson for the Muslims. For Amir al-Mu'mineen himself, there was no difference. He stayed firm in the early battles. He stayed firm in the Battle of Hawazin as well. He stayed firm in all of his later battles, even after the Prophet's lifetime. But for the other Muslims who thought that strength is what gives you victory in battle, this was a lesson. It isn't strength in numbers or in weapons or in how much you can overcome your enemy by striking fear in their hearts or by having a larger army. But it is the way that you are coming to battle and the intention that you have. In reality, it is far simpler than many Muslims would think. So it is a human nature for us to rely on the easiest of our resources. And if we have a large army, we won't think about preparing ourselves and readying ourselves to face the challenges that we might need to face. We'll think that we have a shortcut. If we have a great deal of money, then we're not going to make a careful budget for ourselves because we think that we have more than enough. If we are smart, then we're not going to study because we think that we can pass the exam without studying. Those who are not so smart, they should spend time and study. We can wing it, and we'll still do better than they can do. So this is the actual challenge that people have. The reality is that Islam has as much depth and profundity as anyone would wish to achieve within Islam, and that is the reason why the Prophet introduced Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam in the first place, to give you all of that depth, and I will talk about that. But at the same time, Islam in its essence is a very simple religion. And because we are out of time, I want to stop here. We will talk about many other avenues of how understanding and appreciating that simplicity can bring us closer to achieving success and salvation. But one of the best examples we have of this principle demonstrated in history is on the journey to Karbala. And it is said that on that journey to Karbala, one thing that Imam Hasan would say time and time again is Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And at one time, the Imam would repeat that kalimatul istirja', that Inna lillah, so many times that his son Ali Akbar, who was with him, he said, yeah, but why is it that you are saying this so much? Yes, we belong to God and to Him we will return, but why is it that you are repeating this so many times? And the Imam said that I saw, when I closed my eyes, that there is a battlefield before me, and I heard a voice from the unseen saying that this caravan is journeying and death rides behind them. And so when I heard those words, this reminder of our return to Allah, it comes repeatedly to my lips. And many soldiers, many who were with the Imam, they had the faintest hint, and it might have caused them to worry and to wonder about their own safety or about their own well-being or what would happen to their families or what would happen to them. But Ali Akbar recognized that this was not a complex decision. This was not something that required any great level of thought. He said, Ya abati alasna ala al-haq? Tell me, O father, are we not on the right path? And that is all that Ali Akbar needed to ask. That is the only reassurance that he needed from his father. He knew the answer. But there were some times when words needed to be exchanged, and this was one time when the question from Ali Akbar solidified his own intention. And it also brought some tranquility and some peace to the heart of Imam Hussein. He said, my son, of course, we are on the right path. And then Ali Akbar said, echoing the words of his own grandfather, Amir al-Mu'mineen, why should we concern ourselves whether we are a caravan going towards death or whether we are stationary and death is coming towards us? In that way, Ali Akbar, he brought peace to the heart and to the soul of his father. And Imam Hussein, he relied on his son. But on the day of Ashura, there was a different type of peace that the Imam sought from his son. And this was the peace and of the recognition that his son would not hesitate to go forward and to do battle. When the first signs of the battle began to be seen on the day of Ashura, then history tells us that Imam Hussein looked time and time again towards his son, and he wanted to assure himself that his son would not would not put his father to shame by not being the first to volunteer for battle. And Ali Akbar, he knew what it was that his father had prepared him for. He knew what the meaning of that gaze was. It is said that he came before anyone else to ask his father if he would be able to go and do battle, but it was only the insistence of the companions of the Imam that none of the progeny of the Prophet should be harmed so long as they lived, that preserved the life of Ali Akbar until the afternoon of Ashura. But as soon as those companions had offered their lives and given their sacrifice, then the Imam's gaze met the gaze of Ali Akbar. The son came towards his father. He said, Father, permission to go to the battlefield. And even though those were the words that the Imam expected from his son, and even though this was what the Imam had been waiting for, the Imam did not give permission to go and do battle. He said, Akbar, if you wish to go to the battlefield, it is not your father you must ask permission from. It is your aunt. And so Ali Akbar went to his aunt Zainab. He asked her for permission to go to do battle. And at first his aunt said, "No, my son, you will not go." And then she hugged her nephew. And for a long time she refused to let go, until gently Ali Akbar said that my father has already brought together those things that he wishes to prepare me for battle with. He is waiting, and I do not wish to keep my master and my father waiting longer. That was perhaps the thought that allowed Lady Zainab to pull herself from her beloved Ali Akbar. She gave him prayers. She gazed at him longingly as he went back towards his father. And Imam Hussein, with his own hands, he prepared his son for battle. He had rushed him and made sure that he would be the first martyr. But now, as the father was preparing his son for battle, his hand lingered as he tied the turban of his grandfather, the Prophet, on his head, as he handed him his sword, as he mounted him on his horse, and as he bid him farewell to go and face the enemy. And it is said that when the Imam saw his son go forward to the battlefield, there was a prayer that escaped his lips. "Oh Allah, I have given my son in your path, but let me gaze upon his face at least one more time." Maybe that was the reason that Ali Akbar, who had never in his life complained of anything to his father, at that moment felt such thirst in his throat that he turned his horse back towards the camp of the Imam. He returned to the presence of his father. He said, "Oh my father, if I could have a sip of water, then the enemy would recognize the attack of Amir al-Mu'mineen in my own movements." The Imam said, "Oh my son, look at your own father's lips and you will see that they are more parched than your own." Ali Akbar, he returned to do battle, and he was martyred fighting bravely. Imam Hussein, when he was alone on the eve of Ashura, he remembered his son, and he said that I raised you and I mounted you on the horse, but look at now your father who is mounting the horse alone. But even more sad and even more pitiable was the sister of Ali Akbar, who remembered her brother on the continued journey from Karbala. She might have looked at that head that was raised on a spear and said, "Oh my beloved Ali Akbar, tell me, one who has you for a brother, do you think that she would ever be made a captive? Would anyone expect that her hands and her feet would be bound in chains and that she would be put before the enemy who would mock her having been made a captive from one city to another?"